Hello and welcome to a new episode of Interpreting India. From geopolitical complexities to economic uncertainties, India faces critical challenges in its quest for a more prominent role on the world stage. This season, we at Carnegie India continue to bring voices from India and around the world to examine the role of technology, the economy, and international security in shaping India's future. I'm Srinath Raghavan, a non-resident senior fellow with the Security Studies program at Carnegie India. 25 days into the United States and Israel's war on Iran, the conflict appears to be at something of an inflection point. It is not clear, however, if the inflection is towards further escalation of the conflict or towards a cessation of hostilities. Over the past weekend, US President Donald Trump has held out a 48-hour ultimatum for Iran to unblock the Straits of Hormuz. The Iranians have responded by promising crushing strikes on the Gulf Arab states as well as on American entities in the region. Following what appears to have been hectic diplomacy, including other regional players like Egypt and Turkey, President Trump announced that talks with Iran were going well and that he was postponing his ultimatum by 5 days. The Iranians, for their part, have denied direct talks and reiterated their conditions for ending the conflict. Meanwhile, the global economy continues to be held hostage by this conflict, with countries like India being particularly vulnerable. To help us get a handle on this confused and tumultuous situation, and to understand India's challenges and options, we have with us today Ambassador Dharmendra. Ambassador Dharmendra is a non-resident senior fellow at Carnegie India. He joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1990 and served in various capacities in Indian missions across the world and at the Ministry of External Affairs in New Delhi. His overseas assignments include stints at Indian missions in Tehran, Dushanbe, Washington, D.C., and Dhaka. He also served as India's Consul General to Hong Kong and Macau SAR, as High Commissioner to the Republic of Zambia, and as Ambassador to the Islamic Republic of Iran. At the headquarters in New Delhi, he headed the Disarmament and International Security Affairs Division and later the Policy Planning and Research Division at the Ministry of External Affairs. Ambassador Dharmendra, welcome to Interpreting India.
Thank you. Thank you, Srinath. Great to be here.
Could we begin by getting a sense from you on how the war is currently poised, especially as seen from Iran's perspective? We have a lot of commentary which tends to focus on what the United States is doing. People are trying to second-guess Donald Trump's mind when it's not very clear that he knows his own mind. Clearly, there's a lot of focus on what the Israelis are up to. But when it comes to Iran, the reporting tends to be quite sketchy and speculative. So I'm quite keen to get a sense from you on how you think Iran looks at this particular conflict 25 days into it.
Great question. 25 days into the war, I think beyond all expectations, perhaps even within the Iranian establishment, they have managed to survive. Punishing strikes by two of the most powerful militaries in the world. They have weathered the strikes and they have managed to shape the contours of the fight, of this battle, which they were trying to avoid. If in the run-up to the February 28th assassination of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, the Iranians and the Americans were having positive talks, as the Oman's foreign minister Badr al-Busaidi said. There were expectations that there will be a closure on the following Monday, which was due to hold technical talks. So I think for the Iranians, this has been a double blow in terms of a loss in trust. Do remember last June when they were having discussions with the Americans, 5 rounds of talks. The Americans then decided to escalate and launch Operation Midnight Hammer. This time again, they had apparently very good talks, according to Oman. And the Iranians are said to have made unprecedented concessions. So again, why have a war? So I think within the Iranian establishment, there has been perhaps a miscalculation, but definitely a loss of trust. So going forward, if they're having talks now in Islamabad or in Ankara or whoever is mediating the talks, What will then be the starting point from where the Iranians will approach, given that they feel let down twice? Survival itself has been a great messaging from the Iranian establishment. I think the fact that they have weathered these airstrikes, missile barrages, and managed to strike back, sometimes horizontally, sometimes vertically, and also taken siege of the Hormuz Straits, and thereby spread the war beyond the region, made it global, upset energy markets, financial markets, what have you. Supply chains have been disrupted. The loss of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has been, I think it kind of set the system into a accelerated mode. So I don't know how to frame it. They had prepared for a succession. Khamenei was 86 years old and he was not keeping good health. He was diagnosed with prostate cancer. But I doubt very much whether they expected he will be eliminated. The American-Israeli calculation seems to have been that his elimination would lead to a collapse. That did not happen. The reason it did not happen was the Iranians have kind of prepared succession plans, given their experience last June, and the number of assassinations of their top leaders and scientists by Israel, suspectedly by Israel. So I think overall they had prepared, perhaps little taken aback by a direct strike on Ali Khamenei, but they recovered very fast. Do remember last June in Midnight Hammer, it took about 2 days, roughly 48 hours, for the Iranians to get their act together and start counterattacking Israel. This time, I think within a couple of hours of strikes on Khamenei, they launched counterstrikes at Israel, overwhelmed their defenses and air interceptors. It was just swarms of drones, very cheap drones and missiles. So recovery of the system, rallying together of the senior leadership, constituting a selection committee to make it to get into selection of the new supreme leader, declaring that a new supreme leader has been appointed. This shows that the system had prepared for such an eventuality, and also played out, in my view, multiple war game scenarios. If an energy facility is hit, then what will be the reciprocal targets they will hit? Last year in June, they kept the conflict confined to Israel. This year, from around December, they have been telegraphing that a strike on Iran would make it a regional strike, and they will hit American bases in the region, treating them as legitimate targets. And they have done that. So by and large, I think messaging is on two fronts. One, externally, any country which hosts an American base from which Iran is attacked, we consider that a legitimate target. Horizontally, they've expanded and hit multiple infra facilities to compensate for the strikes on Iran. Vertically, what they have done, they have raised the threshold for both Israel and the United States. So worked on externally, that seems to have been the game plan of the Iranian military planners. Internally, I think this is very important for us to keep in mind. Internally, the system has, by demonstrating unity, by showing that it can survive punishing attacks, has sent a message to its society that this establishment is not going to crumble. And that was a very strong message they had to send internally, because in January there were countrywide anti-regime, anti-government protests. These were economic. The people are doing very badly. There's high levels of unemployment, high levels of inflation. Society does feel that the future is bleak. Their prospects are narrowing. Poverty rates are going up. So those demonstrations showed a regime which was on its back foot and kind of, kind of vulnerable. Perhaps the Israeli-US calculation would have been that the establishment is weak. A strike would therefore collapse it. Neither has happened. They have shown internal strength, and externally they have been able to counterattack every country except one, Oman. They've hit UAE, Kuwait, Gulf, all the countries, but they have not so far hit Oman. So this seems to have been the planning within the establishment.
Sure. I just wonder, this kind of a strategy in the face of several waves of decapitation attacks against the Iranian leadership. In terms of actual structures of decision making, how do you think the relationship between different parts of the government? I'm thinking particularly of the president and his office, the IRGC leadership, which also now seems to have devolved into regional commanders of various kinds, and of course the clerical establishment led by the new supreme leader. Are they really in a position to coordinate their actions? Because their actions, as you say, do seem quite well thought out and working to some kind of a plan. And I'm just wondering how, in the face of the kinds of attacks that they've taken on to the top of the regime, this coordination of these kinds of activities, diplomatic, military, various kinds of signaling which is happening, etc., is being carried out.
Historically, Iran has been able to rally around and minimize its losses. Assassination of scientists did not deal a setback to its nuclear ambitions. Assassination of its engineers and missile research developers has not set it back. In June last year, in the first couple of hours of Operation Midnight Hammer, the entire top echelons of Iran's strategic establishment were wiped out in targeted assassinations. They managed to counter-strike exactly the same they have done. So there is a coordination which works. And here I think it is important to talk a little bit about Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. One of the longest serving autocrats, divine leader, whichever way, it depends on where you sit and how you view him. He had, over the four decades of his rule over Iran, managed to balance all the factions. The IRGC pulls in one direction, then the executive authorities pull in one direction. Then, of course, there are the deep states, the Ettelat, the intelligence. Then there are foundations, which look after war veterans of the 88-89 war, the Mustazafin. Then there are parastatal authorities like the Khatab al-Anbiya, which also give, they do social work, but they're also very big in construction. So you have multiple stakeholders, each with their own territorial or jurisdictional areas of governance, which they guard very zealously. They're very jealous. They don't let others intrude into their territory. So if I go from the MFA, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I go to the Ministry of Shipping to discuss some of our partnerships in port management, then the shipping ministry is quite zealous about keeping the MFA out. So, that management somehow used to be done at the Supreme National Security Council. The SNSC brings all the players together, reporting directly to two heads. One is the Supreme Leader and the other is the President. SNSC used to do that coordination. So we have Ali Khamenei, who kept all these various factions in play, balancing them out, checking their excessiveness, but keeping all of them in play. He was ably supported by successive Supreme National Security Council, Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, ending with the death last week of Ali Larijani. Ali Larijani was a very astute, he was speaker for many years, over 10 years, I think 2 terms he was a speaker, a scholar philosopher, translated Immanuel Kant into Farsi, good relations with all factions, and he was coming around as the fulcrum around which this war was conducting, how the state was managing its efforts, how relief was being reached to bombed out schools or residential facilities or hospitals. All these were targeted during the ongoing conflict. The loss of Supreme Leader Khamenei led to Larijani filling that vacuum. Larijani's loss removed a valuable, pragmatic interlocutor who could have actually aided the ongoing ceasefire talks. Eliminating him from the picture has kind of now brought in back the IRGC leadership. So, Ali Bagher, who is the Speaker of the Parliament, who is now leading the talks with the Americans in Islamabad, he's ex-IRGC. And he was a brigadier, I think, in the air wing, fought in the 88 Iran-Iraq war. The IRGC is now, in my view, what reports I read, how I see the comments and statements being made, seems to be on the ascendant. They seem to be calling the shots. But the Arakchi, the foreign minister, is making his diplomatic calls. He speaks to his Russian counterpart, his Indian counterpart, some of the GCC countries. But the strategy, execution, responses are all being done by the IRGC. So we are seeing a securitization of the state, which was kept slightly in check. I think going forward, we may see a more assertive IRGC and a much more assertive security apparatus, which will be more in the center of running the country. That's how I'm looking at it.
Sure. I was also wondering, the Ali Larijani's sort of targeted assassination happened in the wake of him actually participating quite publicly in the Quds prayer on the preceding Friday. And I was just wondering, given the record of senior leaders being taken out, I mean, wasn't that quite a sort of strong ideological statement also on the part of the regime to actually put him in public in such a location like that?
This is something which has always puzzled me. But my own thinking, my assessment is that at times like these, at times of challenges, the system's leaders step forward. If they go into hiding, if they're living in bunkers, the people will then feel, these guys have left us alone. They are not protecting us. That mingling with the people, President Pezeshkian was walking in the streets, Foreign Minister Arakchi was out on the streets. This is, I think, symbolic and sends a very powerful message to the people that their leadership is with them. I think I would look at it that way. It's something because I know for a fact that the scientists who were assassinated were going home from a private dinner at their families, driving home, and they got killed on the way. So somewhere, I don't know if it is a weak security cover. They kind of, they have consistently undermined or ignored or not paid sufficient attention to guard their leadership, their high value assets. But the other could be this demonstration, and also we have to keep in the Iranian society, whatever may be the anti-establishment, pro-establishment, we'll not get into that. We can discuss that later. In Shia philosophy, in Shia religion, martyrdom is very high. The concept of shahadat, that you give your life for a cause, for your country, for your faith, these are highly valued. So embracing death comes pretty naturally. At times like this, during war, during whatever reconstruction programs you have, you have to take care of your people. That's when the leadership steps up, and they're minding for your life. I think somewhere takes a backseat. I would look at it that way.
Sure. Which actually brings me quite nicely to the next thing that was on my mind, which is that a lot of our commentary, especially which is written in quick sort of ways, not the deep scholarship I'm talking about, the commentary, tends to think of Iran as purely a theocratic kind of a state, and that the Islamic Republic obviously had a very strong religious ideological component to it. But I was wondering if you could also just explain to us how you would see the relationship between this kind of religious identity and the dimension that you just referred to, and Iranian nationalism. Because it strikes me as a historian that it is important to remember that Iran is perhaps the only country in West Asia which was never formally colonized by the Western powers, and that it has a historical continuity going back to the preceding Qajar and other Persian dynasties, which gives it a certain sense of itself. It's a bit like the way that the Chinese tend to think of their long history, right? I mean, there is a sense in which the continuity of the state, without falling into formal colonization, even if they have been subservient, dependent, put under pressure, etc., survives through in terms of their own self-conception. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the relationship between these two streams, religious identity, but also of nationalism.
Great question, Srinath. Not easy to answer, given that we'll be covering at least 2,000 to 3,000 years of a civilization, which has survived multiple waves of invasions, has also invaded other countries, was a great empire. In modern times, both during the Shah's time and now during the rule of the clerics, religion has been a contested space. During the Shah's time, the urge to be secular, to be seen Western, overwhelmed the religiosity feelings of a section of society, which pushed them towards the clerics, the conservative, deeply religious segments of society felt that their space under the Shah was shrinking. So the Shah decreed there'll be no public prayers, there'll be no wearing of the mandatory scarf for ladies to cover their heads and dress conservatively. It became much more Western. Western was criticized by the clerics as garbzadegi, that is, you're aping the West blindly. That concept of garbzadegi remains a centrifugal force which the conservatives embrace but the seculars reject. This continues to this day. 47 years after the revolution, there are surprisingly, there are reports that the resistance of quite a big part of society are a little unreliable, but confidently we can assess that about 40 to 45% of people are now declaring themselves to be atheist. That's a fascinating study. And it's not just one study. There have been 2-3 studies and surveys. The reason is the presence of religion in society has become so overwhelming that people are getting pushed away from religion, paradoxically. So the clerics started in 1979. Imam Khomeini's revolution started on asserting Islam, and he took on he brought the notion of a velayat-e-faqih, the rule of the jurisprudent. The faqih, a wise man, will interpret God's law on earth. That he formalized and brought that power unto himself. That has continued with all the supreme leaders. But increasingly, society has been pushing back, particularly with Gen Z and others. Remember, we are four generations after the revolution. They have no memory of the Shah, and they have no memory of and they resent Islam because they are also globalized. We are looking at a highly literate society, 80 to 85% literacy rates, very high embrace of STEM subjects, high levels of engineering capability, architecture, design, what have you, very, very sophisticated culture, arts, the works. I mean, you do remember their movies have won multiple Oscars. Great films have been produced from Iran and continue to be. That contestation is continuing to this day, where Islam and nationalism may not be seen as a zero-sum game. But if I'm not religious, that does not make me not Iranian. I am Iranian first, my religion is second, across the society. Deeply conservative, nationalism is very assertive. So last June, when we had the 12-day war, the society rallied around the flag. Despite the resentment against the rulers, against the clerics, there was a rally around the flag high which went through society. It could have been a temporary high, it could have been whatever, however we want to see it. Nationalism then came to the fore, a deeply unpopular regime. Whole society rallied behind them. Again, they protested in December and January because there were economic grievances, legitimate economic grievances. The Iranian ruling establishment felt that this was being egged on and encouraged from abroad. Maybe weapons were being brought in through the Kurdish area. So the response of the regime was very harsh. What I feel now with this present war, we may have again narrowed the gap between the establishment and society, driven primarily by nationalism. The nationalistic fervor in Iranian, whether it's their football teams or support for their wrestling teams or the athletics, I've seen it firsthand. It's very, very strong. So I think we are again seeing the pendulum shift from a time in January when a regime establishment was deeply unpopular, but an unpopular war which has had such devastating consequences, particularly after the US president said, help is on its way. People are wondering, is this the help we wanted? You're bombing our schools. 160 young children have died just because the school was co-located in a military compound. I mean, all our cantonments have the army public schools and the sainik schools. We are close to a cantonment. Poor targeting or error in targeting. But the ebbs and flows of society where they are highly nationalistic, sometimes highly religious, sometimes may not be highly religious. That I think that fluidity is quite an interesting dynamic for an outsider to observe how the Iranian society organizes itself from rural areas to urban areas. And with globalization, internet penetration, use of Instagram, which is very popular, use of VPN to bypass restrictions on WhatsApp and all. It's really exposed the society, particularly the youngsters, who now form, I would say, roughly 55 to 60% of society would be below the age of 30. So they also form part of the protests because they feel their future is bleak. So we have this very interesting dynamic playing out in India.
Perhaps we could now turn a little bit to India. And I was wondering, given your very long experience of dealing with Iran from the vantage point of the sort of Indian diplomacy in this region, if you could just give us a quick sort of, tour de horizon of the highs and lows that this relationship has gone through really in the last 20 years. Because I think in some ways, I think it's fair to say that, 2001, when Prime Minister Vajpayee really kind of took a series of initiatives, marked the beginning of a certain phase of India-Iran engagement. And I'm just wondering, whether in the last 25 years, and it's a relationship which has never been easy, but at the same time, it has meant something to India. And at other times, we have faced competing pressures to calibrate that relationship. So from your vantage point of as a participant observer of this relationship, if you could just give us a sense of how you see this kind of ebb and flow of this relationship.
It's not been a consistent relationship. We'll have to keep that in mind because the Shah was not very friendly towards India. And post 79, the revolution was insecure, trying to settle itself. So somewhere their external attention was completely focused on getting rid of the war with Iraq. Then we had the various Iraq-Afghan war, then the first war, then the second war. I think that kept them a little busy, and therefore bilaterals were a little bit on the, I would say, back burner for both sides. We were also grappling with our own internal challenges, 1991 economic reforms. We were also trying to find our feet. But with India's economic growth, the strides we have made in the last 2 decades, beginning 2001, 91, of course, but beginning 2001 and through the global financial crisis, I think they recognize that now India can be a valuable partner for them. And we've always bought oil from them. Energy was the fulcrum of our bilateral trade. And I like to say, and I like to remind everybody that till 1947, we were neighbors. And that relationship continues given the popularity of Indian films in Iran, the number of teachers who went and taught in rural areas in Iran. I mean, if you travel somewhere and someone will say, "Oh, my doctor was an Indian, my teacher was an Indian," that those linkages remain the soft linkages. Those remain durable because we had a big Indian community living in Iran. They were part of the society. Many were born there. They did their compulsory mandatory military service. We have two gurudwaras, Gurudwara in Tehran and a Gurudwara in Zahidan. Zahidan is one of our oldest gurudwaras in the world because Guruji went there and set up the Gurudwara. From Afghanistan, he'd gone into Zahidan. So that relationship has now become more dynamic. Sometimes, not sometimes, quite often held hostage to Iran's own interactions with its other partners, particularly the strain it has with the US. That kind of cripples our space to play with Iran, given the strength of the India-US partnership. So by and large, I think the relationship has weathered multiple challenges. It's on I would say, a very good footing. And successive prime ministers and governments have made sure that there is no diminution of the importance of Iran in our relationship when we look west. Conversely, I would also say that more could have been done, definitely. But given Iran's own economic challenges, say, for instance, settlement of payments for trade, non-sanctioned items, becomes very difficult for our traders. Many of them say, it's a headache, I might as well go and do something somewhere else, work with somebody else. There, the Iranians say, listen, you guys don't stand by us. You should do more with us. So I think, by and large, there are grounds for pessimism, but there is actually, I think, much more space for optimism in the relationship.
Right. You mentioned about Iran being an important source of Indian oil imports and purchases and so on. I think at its height, maybe about 17-18% of our imports were coming from Iran, which was only second to Saudi Arabia at one point of time. But I think from 2019 onwards, there has been a drastic kind of cutting down of our fuel imports from Iran. And that has happened principally because of this ratcheting up of American sanctions on anyone who does these kinds of things. I'm just wondering, I mean, is that a correct reading that our ability to sort of purchase oil from Iran was principally constrained by what the Americans were threatening any third party which would do? And it seems to me that China is perhaps the only country which has actually gone ahead and continued to do settlements in yuan and so on.
Well, that's correct. Actually, what happened up until 2019, Trump suspended the special exemption waivers which were given to a handful of countries to continue buying Iranian oil. So we lifted a lot of Iranian oil during that period of when these special exemptions were in operation. The reason being, two of our refineries are engineered for processing Iran sweet or Iran light, one of the most easy to refine oils in the world. That's why it's very highly valued. And the so-called dark fleet is very profitable because smaller countries with not that high capable refineries prefer Iranian sweet. Easy to process. There's some Nelson composite index or something like that. Iran is one of the most favored. What happened in 2018 was Trump withdrew from the JCPOA and gave an exemption of 1 year. And then imposed what is called secondary sanctions. The US operates on two sanction streams. One is primary sanctions, which prohibits American nationals, American entities from working or interacting or doing business with a sanctioned entity. Second is secondary sanctions. Even if a country is sanctioned, a third country's entities engaging in trade or business with them can also be sanctioned. Imagine the extraterritoriality of American law. Now, if an Indian oil company or ONGC Videsh is exposed to the global market where they are dealing in dollars, they are transacting in American banks, they are raising bonds, they are going to the market to shore up their revenues and their capital, they have multiple shareholders, FIIs invest in their stocks. The exposure then to the global financial architecture makes it very difficult to work with a sanctioned entity and makes it very difficult, next to impossible, to escape secondary sanctions. The fear of that deters our companies from buying Iranian oil. So that continues to this day. Now, perhaps with this 30-day exemption or whatever the Americans are talking about, Iran crude has come back into the market. And I think just today, a big VLCC from Iran has landed in India with, I think, almost 2 million barrels of crude or something like that. So, yeah. So I think that did set our trade back. Then we had to just go for traditional items like, tea, rice, pulses, spices, some of these things, because the American sanctions regime on Iran is really, really extensive. It covers almost every sector of their economy.
And one particular sort of area of our interaction with Iran, which I think was exempt from sanctions, at least until about 6-7 months ago, was the Chabahar port, which we were involved in co-developing and subsequently running. And again, I was just wondering if you could give us a sense of this thing. There was a report in the Economic Times which said that even before the American additional 25% tariffs were announced by the Trump administration last year, which I think was in September, the Indian government had transferred the rest of its financial commitment to the tune of about $120 million to the Iranians so that the Iranians could spend it in whichever way that they could. And then we seem to have informed United States of America that we plan to wind down all operations in Chabahar. India Ports Global Limited, which is the sort of vehicle through which the Chabahar was maintaining, I think all our government directors have stepped down. We've taken down the website, etc., in order to shield ourselves from the impact. So I'm just wondering, what does it mean for our longer-term investment? Because the Chabahar port was a very long-term investment for us. Does it mean that we have no serious equities left in play, or is it something that can resume once this conflict comes to some kind of an end? I'm just wondering what the future of this very long-term effect, because it was also at one point of time linked to our highway construction in Afghanistan. It was supposed to be our way in which we would connect with the the other kinds of north-south corridors that are being planned in that region, etc. So I'm just wondering, what does all of that mean given our current position?
Chabahar has been a challenge for both sides. I'll start with the India side first. And we took operational position in 2018, October, December 2018. And that's the year Trump decides to suspend the nuclear deal. And so the project came up under a cloud. We somehow managed to run the project, courtesy our current minister, Dr. Jaishankar, who managed to convince his then counterpart, Mike Pompeo, to extend a pretty generous waiver for Chabahar operations. That kept the port going. And we used the port, we brought in equipment with great difficulty because of that concept of secondary sanctions. So German engineers or Chinese or the Italians, they said, no, destination, if end use is Iran, Chabahar, we want to have nothing to do with it. But we secured a waiver, helped us to support the Afghan government with food, Afghan people with food supplies, wheat, and it worked well. What has happened now is a little history here. In 2023, I think the Biden administration passed what is called the SHIPS Act, as opposed to the CHIPS Act. The SHIPS Act was basically ports operating in unfriendly countries can also be sanctioned. Chabahar automatically came into that, and the waiver, Jaishankar Pompeo waiver, has fallen by the wayside, which is going to expire now in April. We got short-term extensions, but it's going to expire in April. I think it can be part of the ongoing bilateral dialogue between India and the United States to permit India to continue operating the port. Port operations have come down because Iran's external trade has reduced, given the payments difficulties and all that. Bandar Abbas in the Hormuz Strait still remains the principal port for Iran, handling roughly 90% of their trade. Then we have the Caspian Sea ports of Bandar Anzali, and then we have the Chabahar port. Amongst these three, Chabahar is the smallest in terms of operations, but also potentially the most strategic because it's located on the Indian Ocean sea lines of communication. It takes it out directly out of this choke point of Hormuz. So, in terms of strategy, and it's just, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's a 36-hour sail from Chabahar to Kandla. It's a very short sail. And Chabahar has a free zone. So if the gas pipelines, if Iran completes its gas projects and starts the CFZ, then the attraction for Indian companies in a sanctions-free environment to partner with their Iranian counterparts to manufacture, taking advantage of cheap gas and export to India a ready market. So that linkage also is on the table for discussions. So the plans are very good. The plans are very strategic. And hope if all these are resolved with the US, Iran, they can all resolve their financial issues, sanctions, enter into an era of no sanctions, then the potential for Chabahar to partner with our ports becomes enormous. And it's also, we've asked for it to be included in the International North-South Transport Corridor. Inclusion of Chabahar in the INST framework automatically enhances its attractiveness to the Euro-Asian FTA towards the west of Eastern Europe and Iran, Armenia, Caucasus. So we have, if you picture the Caspian, I would look at two nodes. One is Chabahar east of the Caspian towards Central Asian republics, and one is Chabahar west of the Caspian towards Eastern Europe. So IMEC and Chabahar need not necessarily be zero-sum games because each is going into a different direction. They can be complementary. But given the challenges of the Suez Canal, if you remember a couple of years ago, the Evergrande, a huge cargo vessel got stranded in Suez, blocking it for almost 2-3 weeks. At that time, Chabahar was used by some countries to meet their food security requirements, their energy needs. Chabahar became profitable during that period. So it's a very important project, and I hope, I'm sure government will be working on it, and I hope the Americans take a step back and let us continue our operations in Chabahar. It's a very significant port.
Sure. So apart from energy infrastructure like Chabahar, strategic infrastructure, the third kind of axis in which I think India-Iran relations developed in the period that you covered was around shared concerns around terrorism in the region. And certainly from the 1990s, I think the relationship, at least a lot of coordination seems to have happened in order to prevent regimes which are, more disposed towards operating terrorist infrastructure, etc., in Afghanistan, Pakistan, etc., from coming up. And I just wonder, now that things have changed so much, now we have a Taliban regime in Afghanistan with which we even have some kind of a relationship here in India. What does the counterterrorism sort of angle of India-Iran relationships mean? I mean, does it matter in the scheme of things today?
Oh, see, the Iranians are very pragmatic people. That's one thing about them. Ideology is one thing, but they're supremely pragmatic. They were amongst the earliest to embrace the Taliban regime after the downfall of, forgetting the Afghan president who now lives in Dubai.
Ashraf Ghani.
Ashraf Ghani. The Iranians, their understanding of Afghanistan, their analysis, their connections with Afghanistan were some things which helped us in our trilateral discussions and bilateral discussions. There was the Moscow initiative, then there was other initiatives. The Iranians, because of Chabahar, the Afghans' own difficulties with the Pakistanis, I think they lean towards Iran and India for their needs. The other area of some, I'd say, exchange of information was the Jundullah factions in the Baluch area on the border with Iran's Sistan Baluchistan and Pakistan's Baluch area. So that has also been, I think, we mainstream diplomats don't get into these conversations. So I think it would have been part of the intelligence side, or they would have had these discussions. But Jundullah, Iranians were concerned about them. So I think there were some discussions. And given its proximity to Chabahar is also in the Sistan Baluchistan area. It's a very backward province of Iran, Sunni dominated. So, so I think there must have been some conversations, but overall, the focus on anti-terrorism would be the drivers of each country's focus would be slightly separated. India has its own concerns in our region. Iran, not so much, because their borders are much more, settled. The three areas where they see problems is on the Afghan side, sections of the Afghan side, not the Shia Hazara sections, but the Baluch sections. Then they see problems on the Kurdish side. And these are the three: Afghan, Baluch, and the Kurds. Kurds has been the biggest problem for them. And their greatest challenge in the last decade was the rise of ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Because the ISIS had an explicit ideology of treating Shias as kafirs. They would regard them as non-Muslims. So Iraqi Shias, Iran Shias, parts of the Syrian Shias, Alawites, were all united in putting down the ISIS. And surprise, surprise, who was a partner in that operations? The United States. The US and Iran actually cooperated in sharing information, intelligence, who will take out which challenge, which troublesome player. That is the pragmatism which the Iranians had. Yeah, ideologically, it's a great Saturn. Down with America slogans will echo in Tehran. But in a remote desert in Iraq and Syria, these guys were cooperating and actually working together in some areas to bring down the ISIS. So that would be the anti-terrorism framework for the two countries, slightly divergent, with not much commonality except in the Jundullah, that area.
Sure. You mentioned that, in each of these areas, when we deal with Iran, we have always had to balance our equities in the relationship with Iran vis-a-vis what is happening, say, in our bilateral ties with the United States, or perhaps by American sanctions policies and other kinds of more global measures, which were directed at third parties, including countries like us. The other sets of countries with whom I think we've had to balance our equities when it comes to our relationship with Iran are the Gulf Arab states. And, that's an area, where our interests are very clear. Most of the Indians in West Asia live and work in those areas. Those countries account for a very significant level of our, energy imports, of the repatriation of remittances from this people. And it's a major source of overseas employment for our people as well. And I think it's fair to say that, the government over the last few years has put in a lot of effort into building that relationship, particularly with countries like UAE and Saudi Arabia. And in the same time frame of, say, 5 to 7 years, we have seen that the relationship between the Gulf Arabs and the Iranian government has gone up and down. Obviously, there are long-standing tensions going back to the Iranian Revolution itself, which tends to be somewhat simplistically said as a Shia-Sunni divide. But nevertheless, there are concerns that these regimes have about what, a more kind of revolutionary Islam could mean for their own domestic stability. Then, of course, these governments have also, through the Abraham Accords, some of them have established ties with Israel, which is one of the sort of parties to the attack on Iran this time around as well. So I'm just wondering, how do you see India's sort of policy towards West Asia? Because in this particular conflict, we have obviously, been very quick to commiserate with these countries which have been at the receiving end of retaliatory strikes by Iran, because Iran, as you said quite correctly, is more capable of striking these Gulf Arab countries rather than United States or Israeli assets. So we've been very quick to sort of, reach out to them, condemn them, make sure that we are with them. But at the same time, we have said nothing at all about the attack on Iran. So it does seem like our policy has got a certain kind of tilt towards the Gulf Arab states and pretty much away from Iran in the current context. But then again, we need the Iranians because at this point of time, the Straits of Hormuz and our ability to get that going depends on our relationship. So our prime ministers had 2 calls with President Pezeshkian. So clearly, perhaps some degree of recalibration is already underway. But I'm just wondering, why, what explains this kind of somewhat initially one-sided position towards, or at least not saying much on the Iranian front, and then now perhaps bringing some degree of more a rounded perspective to the way that we deal with
Oh, lots to unpack. Let me just start with Iran, and this is a personal observation. I think the commentary on Iran, Israel, US attacks on Iran, responses could have been a little more forthcoming. And one way we have nuanced, we massaged a challenge was to get Parliament to step up and pass a resolution or, condemn an action or something. I think we could have taken cover in that, finessing it. The other is the position of supreme leader in the Iranian system as the Velayat-e-Faqih. Is he a divine authority? Yes, so people say. So his death was taken quite badly in sections of Shias in India, Iraq, Pakistan, and Iran itself. Is he a politician? Yes, he is, because he has ultimate say on matters. How exactly do we respond to his death? I think that would have been a challenge for us to finesse, or we could have made some statements, but again, from Parliament, that would give a cover to distance the executive from the people, from Parliament. The other easier part to unpack would be the successful manner in which we have engaged the Gulf Arab countries, Gulf Cooperation Council, and the Islamic Republic. I think we've kept both. And do keep in mind, we also have very good relations with Israel. So we've kept multiple relationships going without each becoming a intrusion into the other. There will be convergences, there will be gray areas, there will be challenges. But for me, dealing with the Iranians when they asked about I2U2 or IMEC or Abraham Accords, I said, look, our relationship stands on its own. And the fact that we were still trading with them, we had kept their money with us, which was being released to them on a need basis. I think that kind of took care of the relationship. The Iranians becoming increasingly friendless. Up until 2023, they had a very tense relationship with the Saudis. 2019, they bombed. The Iranians don't claim it, but the Upcake Khurais oil fields, which are now in play, were bombed by drones from Iran. So that relationship, they've also managed. The Iranians understand that short strip of water between separating the Gulf Arab countries and Iran has to be bridged. So efforts are going on both sides. On the Iran-India relationship, I think overall, the intrusion of Iran's relations with other countries does come into play at times. But they have also put in place something mirroring our policy, Act East. And they say when we act East, the first country which comes to us is India. And then we look at ASEAN, China, all of them. So they also have that Act East policy. But I think by and large, you've captured some of the GCC issues. We have an FTA with the Comprehensive Economic Partnership with UAE, which, surprise, surprise, enables Iran to trade with us. So that, when you use Dubai as a transit port, some of the essentials like pharmaceutical inputs to manufacture medicines for their society, APIs go from India via Dubai. Settlement is done in Dubai, so that there are mechanisms people have worked out. Overall, I think up until February 28th, the Iran GCC relationship was looking settled. It was not that difficult. Iran had good relations with the Saudis. The economic aspect was not coming up primarily because the restrictions of the Americans' secondary sanctions. So the Saudis had multiple discussions, talked about investments in Iran, but it's kind of difficult except for the Chinese. Even the Chinese are careful about US secondary sanctions. They don't want their companies to lose American business. Everyone wants US business. So US has that leverage. But by and large, I think long answer to very, very complex question on a complex issue is we've balanced both sides. And Iranians being pragmatic, they understand that at times they will need India's vote or India's support and will keep India on side. They are left large vessels out through Hormuz Straits. During the middle of the war, Deputy Foreign Minister Khatibzadeh was in Delhi for the Resina dialogue. I don't know how many times Minister Jaishankar and Arakshi have spoken in the last 2 weeks alone. So I think that there's a maturity and a comfort in both capitals.
Sure. Looking forward, I mean, again, as we discussed, all throughout, it's a little difficult to see how and in what time frame this conflict will perhaps come to an end. But instead of asking you to speculate on that, I just want to get a sense from you on whether you think the region as a whole, particularly Iran, the GCC countries, I'm leaving Israel out for the minute because that relationship seems to me to be much more straightforwardly antagonistic. The region, the Persian Gulf region, can actually go back to something which resembles status quo ante, or is there going to be a new normal, as it were, which will come out? Because I think a lot depends also on what are the terms in which this conflict ends, right? I mean, because if there is no clear kind of set of agreements which underpin a ceasefire at this point of time, that will only mean that it is literally a ceasefire and that many of the existing problems today will perhaps slowly unravel over a period of time. So I'm just wondering, how do you see the future of West Asia after guns go silent, at least in this round? And perhaps if you could just add a line or two on, where you think India is going to be positioned in all of this.
We'll start with India. Big diaspora, about 10 million people working in the GCC, huge energy partnership, remittances. We export a lot of food items to the Gulf countries, import a lot of our fertilizer, energy needs, whatnot from there. So where do Iran and the GCC stand? I think it'll be a combination of two interesting observations you made. There will be bitterness going forward. So it may not be status quo ante pre-February 28th. There will be bitterness. I don't think the GCC ever expected the Iranians would attack their facilities with such, ferocity. That UAE was the biggest sufferer, surprisingly, given the UAE-Iran relationship. So for me, that was a big surprise. But by expanding, we started our conversation on this point, horizontally and vertically, the Iranians have basically rearranged the regional order, or they've triggered a rearrangement of the regional order. So your second point, I think the failure of the Americans to come to the rescue of, say, the Ras Lanan gas facility in Qatar, why did you have to bomb South Pars? If you bomb South Pars, the Iranians made it very clear we're going to hit Qatar. So Qatar was also taken aback. They had a very good relationship. When Qatar was isolated by the Saudis in 2017-16, Qatar was using Iranian airspace for its flight landings and takeoffs, and all its fruit and vegetables were coming from Iran. So I think there will be bitterness. But that bitterness will also translate into a much more pragmatic engagement. How do you engage with Iran? For that, Iran has to be brought back from the cold. It has to be mainstreamed. And when you mainstream Iran, we're going to see a weakening of the conservative hardliners in Iran. Because the more you isolate Iran, the more the security state is dominating society, culture, governance, politics. So by weakening the moderates, weakening the pragmatic, let's engage a globalized world, we'll have to be more nuanced. I think that group, if they come back, which I think they will, then the relationship between the GCC and Iran could turn a new chapter. There will be bitterness. There will be a hangover of this war. It's not going away. The Americans may leave. I mean, not literally. Tomorrow the president may say, no, I'm going to Cuba or whatever. So he may lose interest in the Gulf. But we all have to live together. We need their energy. Our people live there. Their safety is very important for us. A bulk of our fertilizer, the ammonia, the nitrogens, capital flows, all of them come. I see here an opportunity. That opportunity is one for our construction companies to now bid for post-war reconstruction in the West Asia region. Whether you're Larsen and Toubros or Shapurji Palanjis or whoever, they have an opportunity. Second, given the the attacks on Dubai, Qatar, not so much Saudi Arabia. Okay, Saudi Arabia. Let's include Saudi Arabia. You have removed the tag of safe haven, risk-free investments in the Gulf. Western capital, which was happily going to the Gulf, even Indian capital, our people also were investing. I think to restore that image is going to be a very steep climb for GCC. In that, why not promote a Bombay-Goa axis? Bring capital to Bombay. We are just next door to Singapore, good ties with finance in Hong Kong. I see those opportunities. And tech. I think Saudi Arabia's ambitions of 2030 vision plan, their NEOM city, those will all come under a cloud now. I mean, the data centers today, I heard reports that an Amazon web center in the region was, I think, in Bahrain. The Iranians bombed it. So you've now exposed technology also to vulnerabilities. I think therein lie the opportunities, but there will be some bitterness, no doubt.
Sure. And on the Iran-Israel kind of axis, now, the Israelis have said that, they want to weaken Iran as far as possible. They couldn't destroy the regime. They couldn't, break up the state. All of those maximalist goals are gone. But clearly now the idea is to just keep hitting till you have a ceasefire so that you can weaken the Iranian capability. But do you see that Iran will prioritize its reconstitution of its military-industrial capabilities, particularly ballistic missiles, which have proven to be quite effective, at least even in a very lopsided contest like this? And, some of the things that the Iranians have done in terms of striking American, THAAD systems, etc., has been actually quite surprising and impressive from the perspective of, just sheerly what they have pulled off in terms of military capabilities. So some reconstitution of that seems almost inevitable for any government. And the nuclear question remains. I mean, because the Supreme Leader Khamenei was supposed to be the cork in the bottle, and he has been unlocked. So what does that mean? I mean, so I'm just wondering, because that will then again also have some implications for whether Iran is actually bottom from the cold in a straightforward way or not. I'm just wondering if you had any sense of how that might play out. I understand this is very speculative, but I would love to have your thoughts.
If the moderates continue to be weakened by external forces like Israel and the United States and the Saudis, do keep in mind the two main players against JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, were Saudi Arabia and Israel. They persuaded Donald Trump in 2018 to withdraw from the deal, with the carrot that he may get a better deal than what Obama has concluded. So that genie, yes, you are absolutely correct, has been uncorked with Khamenei's death. He was the guardrail who pushed back against nuclearization. So will we see a rearrangement of security doctrines? And to what degree will that rearrangement and what shape and direction will it take? Hard to say right now, but I'm confident it's on the cards. Second, from such an asymmetrical position, such a lopsided conventional weakness, the kind of missiles the Iranians have used against Israel, they've overwhelmed their air defense systems. And they've gone and hit Dimona, civil city, not the nuclear side, but the civil side. So I think if we get the moderates back into play, maybe there'll be some calming of temperatures in the region, particularly Iran and Israel. If we get the hardliners in play, who seem to be now dominant, given there is no one to push them back. Ali Larijani, in my opinion, I met him multiple times, would have been one such person who could have smoothened their role in society going forward. Now you have all the hardliners. Mohsen Razavi is a 1988-89 Iraq War veteran, former head of IRGC, has now come back as head of IRGC because all the leaders have been knocked out. And he's a hardliner of hardliners. So if the assassinations continue to take place, and we do not have any interlocutors who are reasonable, who can be engaged, and we are left to deal with hardliners, then that relationship will remain fraught, and that will hold down the region. So long as the Iran-Israel account is not settled, then you're going to take down Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and also bring a strain into the GCC-Iran relationship. But a question you didn't ask, and I think we should also consider, going forward, what will be the GCC's own engagement with Israel and the United States? There will be a recalibration, because backroom channel talks between the GCC foreign ministers and economy ministers would be, you brought an unnecessary war into our region. We had nothing to do with it, but we are all bombed out now for what you've done. Tomorrow you'll go back to, your Pacific retreat in Florida or wherever, but you've left us with a mess. I think that recalibration is very much on the cards. Time duration, what will be its triggers, what will be its contours, how will it play out, and who will be the principal actors? Will Mohammed bin Salman now reach out to Pezeshkian or to Wang Yi or, Lavrov or Jaishankar? Who will he say, come, let's all sit and have a confab? Good opportunity for us. Again, we are presidency of the BRICS. A good time for, coffee table discussions on what exactly will each minister is looking at, and get an idea of, exchange of views, as we say in diplomatic parlance. I think that will be interesting to watch how that plays out.
On that very sharp but sobering note, thank you so much, Ambassador Dharmendra, for sharing your fascinating insights with us. I think this is clearly a war which is poised at an interesting moment. It may come to an end, but the trends that you have identified and laid out so clearly for us, I think, will be in play for the months and years to come. So we hope that we'll have another opportunity to get back to you and continue this conversation at a later date. But for today, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Srinath. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. To make sure you don't miss it, do subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts from. To learn more about our research and our team, you can visit us at carnegieindia.org. You can also find us on social media on X, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you for listening. See you next time.